Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic, let's do it. What's the most unexplainable event that has ever happened to you that still gives you chills? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I lost an entire day. I went to bed Friday night and woke up Sunday morning. Nothing had been disturbed, my phone showed no activity, and there was absolutely no evidence I existed the previous day. I felt absolutely fine, and it hasn't happened again. I've spent 10 years racking my brain over this, and by this point, I'm just going to chalk it up to aliens. I was sitting at a red light on a 2-lane road. I was in the right lane with a big pickup truck blocking my view of the highway I was waiting to cross. My daughter, 6 months old, is in the back seat in the car. The light turned green and I heard a distinct female voice say, "Wait." It wasn't the person in the pickup because all windows were closed. The pickup next to me didn't move. 2 seconds later, a semi-truck ran the red light at high speed. Had I proceeded through the light, I would have been obliterated. It haunts me to this day, some 40 years later. I had a dream that I was in an Irish airport with 2 women. Neither I'd ever seen, but both were distinct in their own way. One was very bird-like with shock blonde hair. The other woman was heavy-set and wore a head bandana. I remember wondering why I dreamt about it. In any case, I wrote it all down in my dream journal. We ate at an Italian restaurant that had a neon sign with spaghetti and meatballs. Fast forward 5 years to me being out of school, and I get sent on an emergency trip to go fix an issue at a site in Ireland. Network broken, HPUX box not booting. It was fun. They sent along a copy of the woman who wrote some of the ERP software and needed to work with some of the staff to iron out the kinks. It was those women. The bandana was because she just completed chemotherapy for breast cancer. The other woman had shock blonde hair and was 50 pounds soaking wet. We ate at that damn restaurant with the neon sign. I sat there aghast eating my chicken parm. Nothing like it has ever happened since. When I was in middle school, my 2.5-year-old pug Rex got really sick with what we later learned was pug encephalitis. He had been in and out of emergency rooms for a few days, and he was having seizures and not acting like himself. However, when this event happened, he was back home with us. A few days into him being sick, I had a dream that I went to visit him at the vet. In my dream, a technician brought him to the lobby to say hello to me, and then walked him into a room filled with bright white light. As soon as he was out of sight, I woke up, checked the clock, saw that it was 2:37 a.m. and went back to sleep. When I woke up that morning, my mom was standing next to my bed and I immediately knew Rex had passed. I found out that he had been taken to the emergency vet again after I'd gone to bed, as he started going downhill again and needed to be hospitalized overnight. A few hours later, my mom got a call that she needed to go to the hospital immediately and he was declining quickly. He passed away shortly after she arrived, right around 2:37 a.m. We later found out from our neighbors that their dog, who was friends with Rex, became very restless and started howling right around the time he passed, despite Rex being in a hospital miles away. I like to think that this dream was him saying goodbye to me, and it helped me a lot with the grieving process, as I felt like I got to see him one last time before he passed. I've never had another experience that was even remotely similar, which makes it even stranger. One summer, my friend and I decided to go camping in a remote area of the forest. On the second night, we both woke up the second sound of footsteps around our tent. We figured it was an animal, but the steps were too heavy and deliberate. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on a tree nearby, like someone hitting it with a stick. We called out, but there was no response. After a few tense minutes, the noises stopped. The next morning, we found human footprints circling our campsite, but they led nowhere. We never figured out who or what was out there, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. I was raised in Texas, not far from Louisiana. I was playing with my younger sister and cousin in my grandmother's driveway when I was around 11 years old. The driveway, which could accommodate 2 cars, was crossed by a bird or something similar, and its shadows stretched several feet on either side in addition to the driveway's whole width. My grandma started yelling at me to go get the babies. Each of us grabbed a kid and hurried inside. I asked her what was wrong because she was shaking and looking pale. She claimed not to know and had never seen anything, My grandma is a very practical and undramatic person. I still don't know what was flying over her driveway. I gave it some thought once. My family took a brief road trip when I was 7 years old to see my grandma, who was in hospice care. My sister and I noticed our grandmother seated in the rocking chair in our room when we returned home late at night. The rocker that her husband had once owned. Grandma passed away, and our mother informed us when she entered the room that we would be making the trek back the next morning. Although my sister and I didn't talk about it for years, we're positive that Grandma came by to say goodbye. I'm a major skeptic, but this crazy thing did happen to me. My significant other and I were looking for haunted hiking trails to explore with a friend of ours. I forget which trail we settled on. I can find out if anyone is actually curious, but we settled on a supposedly haunted forest in Massachusetts. The night before the hike, I had an incredibly vivid dream that the three of us were in a strange outdoor pool in the woods. It was a bizarre place. It was a bottomless pit of water, probably 8 feet in diameter. It was essentially a pool of water with regular stones surrounding it in a meticulous manner for no apparent reason. The fact that it was bottomless sincerely bothered me, but everyone was complaining that I was just being paranoid, and that I actually needed to wade further into the pool. Over time, they got weird about it, to the point where I began to panic that something was seriously wrong. It escalated to the point where they attempted to drag me under with a terrible, irresistible force, and I woke up in a sweat. Of course, I woke up and immediately told my SO about it. I don't think I've ever woken up in a sweat like that in my entire life, but the dream was just too real. After a while, I calmed down and prepared to go on the hike. The hike itself was pretty normal. I'm a skeptic, so honestly I was not really worried at all, but my SO and her friend were both psyching each other up about it, and I played along because I didn't want to be a downer, until I saw the pool from my dream. I absolutely freaked out. It was a perfect match. The bottomlessness was also featured via dark leaves that lined the bottom, making it look bottomless. I know it's a minor thing to have happened, but I really can't explain how that pool was in my dream or why I felt such a bad feeling about it. Well, regardless if it was some type of premonition or deja vu or even a grand coincidence, you should not have gone into that pool, and probably nothing good would have come of it. So, good. Weird, though. I like it. I work in security, a lot of times controlling gate access, a lot of times at night. For those of you not in the know, generally, if you're doing gate access, you're in a small concrete shack with windows everywhere so you can see what's going on around you. One night I'm at a warehouse out in the boonies. All the warehouse workers were gone for the night. I'm the only person around for miles. I'm kicking back, chilling, and just watching movies. I glance up, and in the reflection on the glass, I see someone walking by behind my shack. I spin around and look outside. I don't see anyone. I look out all of the windows, get up, go outside, and look around. Pull up the footage. Nothing and no one anywhere. I talked to other guards who had worked night shifts at that site. Everyone had experienced it at one point or another. I kept working at that site for 2 years, doing a lot of night shifts. That phantom would show up in reflections every now and then at night. It led to our unofficial night shift motto, if you see something strange, no you didn't. A couple of weeks after my mom died, I was driving home from work feeling very sad and a bit angry. I was pissed off at the universe for leaving me alone. I have no other living family left. She was the last. I was thinking about how we both loved birds and would always point them out to each other. I thought if all that hippie spirituality stuff Mom loved is real, then at least she could do is send me a bird, maybe a kind of sign. It was a long drive and I saw no birds at all. I thought, of course it isn't real. What a silly thing to think. I didn't see so much as a robin or a wren or anything. I parked and walked down the path to my house. While I was putting my key in the door, something colorful caught my eye. I turned. At the end of the path was the most astonishing bird I've ever seen. Every color of the rainbow. A bright yellow or gold head, a scarlet chest, an iridescent blue-black, orange and gold wings, black stripings. It was jaw-dropping. It was the size of a chicken, but a bit taller with a long tail. It just stood there, staring at me. I started to laugh and it got spooked and flapped away over the fence. I lived in a large city, which made it even weirder. My neighbor came outside and saw it too, so it wasn't a hallucination. I got into the house and started Googling colorful birds of that size and shape and eventually found it. It was a Chinese golden pheasant. What the There were no bird sanctuaries or zoos nearby. I never saw it again. I took it as my mom, rolling her eyes at my cynical rejection of her hippie spirituality stuff, saying, "You want to see a bird? I'll send you a bird." It was so great. Many years ago, me and my mom and dad were quietly watching TV in the lounge when an almighty crashing sound came from the kitchen. Dashing out there, we fully expected to be running up the road after the yob who'd bricked our kitchen window. But the window was intact and no heavy pan had slid off the cooker or fallen off shelves or hooks. Everything looked exactly as it should. Until that is, we opened one particular cupboard containing various piles of plates, etc. In one stack, several plates, all positioned quite randomly in the pile, were found to be smashed to pieces, as surely as if hit with a hammer, while the rest of the plates were completely undamaged. Mom sobbed quietly to herself, and she explained that the broken plates had all been brought back from her mom's home, my Nan's, following her death some years earlier. The incident had happened on Nan's birthday. Years ago, my wife and I were staying at a hotel on the coast with a beachfront view. Very late into the night, maybe sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., we were both on the porch looking out at the ocean. Something strange started to move along the beach. It was hard to see at first because it was vague and transparent, but after a minute or two, it became the unmistakable image of two people dancing together, except that the image would disperse like a cloud of blue, luminous swirling vapors suspended in the air and then coalesce again into the dancing human forms. It did this multiple times as it traveled across the beach. We both saw it and commented on it while it was happening. It was a clear night, and we were both stone cold sober. We stared in awe at this thing for a solid 5 minutes or so before it eventually dispersed without reappearing. To this day, we have no idea if it was purely an optical illusion, actual people paired with some atmospheric effect, or something beyond either of those explanations. When I was a child, between 4 and 6 years old, my sister and I played with a pair of neighborhood siblings down the street. We did this for about 2 years until they moved away. Honestly, I forgot all about them since I was so young. Probably 12 to 14 years later, when I was an older teenager, I was home from college at a local event, fair, or carnival type thing. Out of nowhere, my brain thought, I wonder what happened to my old friends down the street I played with as a kid. Almost as soon as I thought, I passed by a woman who immediately turned around and yelled, "Bad Chad?" It had been more than a decade, and I nearly bumped into her the second she crossed my mind. I was out for dinner with my best friend and her boyfriend. Out of nowhere, I got heavy problems with breathing, a fast heartbeat, cold sweat, and so on, so they brought me to the hospital. The doctors didn't find anything, and after about 1.5 hours, the symptoms went away as abruptly as they had started. I didn't think about it anymore until 2 days later, my uncle found my mother, who was obviously choked to death on her dinner. She lived alone, and we all thought she had a lot of work because she didn't answer the phone for some days. He decided to look after her when she didn't show up to his invitation on New Year's Eve. Because there was no natural death, I don't know if this is the right term in English, it means that there could have been other people involved, so a coroner had to examine her. He limited the death time to 2 days ago, somewhere between 7 and 11 p.m. Well, I think you can guess which time span I went to the hospital with symptoms that are quite similar to the ones she must have had. I was working on the Strip in Vegas in a restaurant and served a family, husband, wife, and daughter. Something about the dad's goatee and mouth reminded me of my dad. I mentioned this. Long story short, my dad was adopted by his dad, not biological, and he had 5 other siblings he'd never met. I met my uncle without knowing he ever existed. The best thing that's ever happened to me. When I was little, my family and I were coming back from a movie night. We drove down a pretty wooded road. While we were on our way, we saw a glow in the sky. When I pulled my head out of the car, I saw what looked like a fiery sphere in the sky with multicolored halos. I remember the fireball being orange, but it changed to a reddish color, and then out of nowhere it disappeared. To this day, I have no idea what I saw that night. I've searched for information on possible explanations, And many people tell me that maybe it was a case of ball lightning or pollen coronas, but none of those explanations resemble what I saw. I'm a deep skeptic, but when I was a child, I was doing a 12 Days of Christmas event where we would doorbell ditch neighborhoods with themed gifts. This was in northern Arizona. Out in one of the neighborhoods that was at the edge of the desert, we were making a turn with me and my friends in the bed of the truck, and we saw a man crouched down at the end of a cul-de-sac right under the streetlight. And I immediately assumed it was a homeless man, but I wondered why they were so far away from the city. Then I realized he was crouched directly under the light, and he was just a dark silhouette. As we were driving away, he stood up and walked in two separate directions. I swear it. One turned into two separate strides in incongruous directions. And there was an ugly dread in my gut, like deeply primal, and it turned to my friend to make sure he'd seen what I'd seen, and his face fell and he quietly said, "I have to go home, right now." My friend was Navajo, and believed he'd just seen a Yi Naldo-Ushi skinwalker, and to this day I wouldn't have a solid argument against it. My mother-in-law died in 2011 after a long, hard fight against lupus. She'd had pneumonia the week before she died, and just came home from the hospital 3 days prior, at which time my wife's cousin dropped in and left behind a single rose with a nice card. The rose was still sort of a bulb, so my wife put it in water and left it on a table in the living room. The next 3 days passed, and the rose just sat there, drooping a bit and looking like it was some kind of dud. Then came the night my wife's mom passed. She'd began to cough up scary amounts of blood, and by the time the ambulance got there, she was pretty well ready to check out. My wife went with her to the hospital, although it really felt like a formality. She died en route from a collapsed lung. When they told my wife it was all over, she started to pray. "Please, Lord," she said, "I've known this day was coming all too soon for my entire life. You prepared me for the pain, and I accepted it long ago. But all I ask is that you show me she's with you in heaven and that she's safe." They pronounced her officially deceased around 2 a.m. Just a few minutes later, my phone rang, and it was my wife explaining everything. As I paced the small apartment, trying to find some way to console her, I just happened to cast my gaze over the end table where my wife had left that single red rose from her cousin. At some point within the time I'd gone into the bedroom around midnight, and what was now 2:08 a.m., the rose had fully bloomed and opened up into the biggest blossom I'd ever seen. I told this to my wife. "Babe, hold on a minute. You're not going to believe this, but that rose has completely bloomed. I swear, just like 2 hours ago, it practically flopped over dead." My wife's audible anguish ceased, and there was just a moment of silent disbelief. She told me about the prayer she'd uttered as the grief had begun to wash over her in the ambulance. To this day, it's the closest thing I've ever had to a paranormal experience. God's answered a lot of our prayers over the years, especially when we needed Him most. But I've had very few other experiences like that. One that felt so undeniably supernatural that it literally took the breath and words right out of us.